The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear. And the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist. But we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, and I thank you for joining me here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. You can access Paranormal King at paranormalking.com. Now, before I introduce my guest, I want to mention a recent account. Now, the following report was provided by Manuel Navrad over at UFO Clearinghouse. It looks like we got another report of a winged humanoid in the Chicago area. This occurred on Friday, October 26, 2018 at 12:30 a.m. The report was submitted by an older couple who worked as an over-the-road team for a trucking company at Alsip, Illinois. They both have been driving together for over 15 years and have been married for over 27 years. The gentleman was at the wheel of the truck when the encounter occurred, and his wife was in the passenger seat. Manuel stated that he spoke to both of them at the same time at a local restaurant near the truck yard in Alsip, Illinois. He said that both agreed to have the story submitted, but asked that their names be kept confidential to the nature of the work and the fact that they did not want someone from their company, who was also based in Alsip, to find out about their sighting. Now, their initial sighting report was as follows. We were on our way to park our truck in the yard after being on the road for 2 weeks. As we approached the railroad track crossing, we noticed something standing in the middle of the road and thought it was a homeless person walking along the tracks. We popped on the high-intensity lights, and to our surprise, it was not a homeless person at all. This thing looked like a large owl, as in it had what looked like feathers and a flat, rounded face with large eyes that reflected the LED lights on our truck. This thing appeared to lunge at us while trying to cover its eyes with its left arm. I pulled on the air horn, and this thing turned its back on us and then took a couple steps and then took off into the air and flew off into the night. We were left sitting there in complete shock, and as we watched it disappear into the night, after a minute or two of looking to see if the damn thing would come back around, we continued into the yard. We parked the truck and walked around towards the car, and as we were almost at the car, we heard what sounded like a scream, followed by another, then silence. We hustled our tails to the car and left for home. Now, Manuel states the area where the sighting occurred is heavily industrialized with a few residential areas nearby. The railroad crossing mentioned sits approximately 3/4 of a mile from the entrance and is surrounded by a wooded area at West 122nd Street and is across the street from a Coca-Cola plant. Manuel said he had accompanied the couple to the location of the sighting and would be posting more information as it comes in the future. He said that the investigation is still ongoing, and he's in talks to talk to the local landowner to get permission to post a trail cam, see if he can possibly catch something. So here again, this is a new report. It's been a while since we got a report. I'd say the last report we received in the Chicago area has been over 6 months. So let's see if this leads to anything else. So let's get started with the show. Tonight's guest is David Weatherly, who is a paranormal researcher, cryptozoologist, author, and world explorer. David is a Renaissance man of the strange and supernatural. He has traveled the world in pursuit of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, magic, and more. From the specters of dusty castles to remote haunted islands, from ancient sites to modern mysteries, he has journeyed to the most unusual places on the globe, seeking the unknown. David's shamanic and magical background has given him a unique perspective in his explorations into the unknown, and he continues to write, travel, and explore, leaving no stone unturned in his quest for the strange and unusual. In 2012, David founded the independent media and publishing company Leprechaun Productions. He's a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM, Darkness Radio, and other radio programs. David has also appeared on numerous television shows, including Ancient Aliens, Mysteries of the National Parks, and Beyond Belief. And he is also the co-founder of Society of the Supernatural. So, David, thanks for joining me.
Lon, good to talk to you, man.
You're a tough guy to pin down, man. I tell you. You keep busy. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the last time we tried to record a show earlier in the year, and that just didn't pan out for some reason. And we ran into each other back in May of 2017 and talked a bit. It was, in fact, this the Chicago winged humanoid phenomena was just beginning, really. And right. We were discussing a bit of that. That was, but that's the last we've talked. So what's been going on lately?
Man, I got so many projects going on, I can barely keep track of it at this point. But it's all good. As you know, I love what I do, and absolutely stay on the move doing this stuff. I literally just got back home a couple days ago. I spent a week living in a haunted location, an extremely active haunted location, and it's again something that no one has ever done before. And I'm not going to go too in depth about it. We've got a project coming out on this place, but I can tell you it was Octagon Hall in Kentucky. And this place, Lon, is just it's absolutely incredible. Even the caretakers, you know, the owner and the gentleman who manages the place, you know, they both say, everyone hands down says, no, I would not stay the night in here. But you know, Dave Spinks and I, we do some research together, and he and I had visited Octagon Hall a couple of years ago and have been just really wanting to get back there. And it just had to be the right thing. It took some timing, you know, because of so many projects going on, and, you know, the right idea. And it just kind of struck me one day that, you know what, I'm going to see if they'll let us live in that place for a week. And they said yes right away. And very gracious people. The owner, Billy Boyd, and the guy who manages the place, Barry Gaunt, who also is now a member of Society of the Supernatural, both outstanding gentlemen, and just showed us a great deal of hospitality. And I believe they thought we were a bit crazy, you know, living in the place. But it's one of those places that there's just so many layers of activity. And it's also one of those places that if you're in there 5 minutes, you're probably going to experience something. It's just crazy. I mean, wow. Disembodied voices, sounds, everything. We sat around. We would just randomly turn on a recorder and get EVPs. It's that intense. And like I said, a fascinating, absolutely fascinating place. History goes back before the Civil War. So, you know, given its location, which is on the Kentucky border, not far from the Tennessee border, excuse me, and you know, the amount of history and everything that occurred there, it's just it was a phenomenal experience. It really was.
Yeah, it was a busy area during the Civil War.
Absolutely.
You know, that'll be interesting when that project comes out. I'll be looking forward to it. You've been involved in writing a series of haunted book series. Tell us a little bit about that. I think you're 4 books right now, right?
We have 2 published and another one, a couple more on the way.
Okay.
That's with another member of SOS. That's a gentleman named Ross Allison. He's my co-writer on that series. And Ross owns Spooked in Seattle, Ghost Tour Company, and obviously Seattle, Washington. And he has a lot of experience in the field. And he and I met quite a few years ago, and had sort of talked back and forth, online about doing a project together. And we started talking one day about doing something, and you know how those conversations go. It wound around to something else, and we came up with this idea for doing a book on haunted toys, which surprisingly no one had done before. And
right.
We wanted to go a bit beyond just the dolls and explore some of the other topics of interest in terms of toys and games and things like that are haunted. So we did the first book, Haunted Toys, and it was pretty successful. And, in the course of that, before it was even finished, really, we decided, we can just take this into a whole series on different topics. So the second one came out this year. It's Haunted Ships and Lighthouses. And that one was a lot of fun to write, too. So we've got that one. And then probably the next one out will be Haunted Churches. And, one of the goals, Ross and I have a couple of goals with it. One is that, we want to get these stories out there and get hopefully correct versions of these tales of hauntings out there. And sometimes that's a bit challenging. The Haunted Ships and Lighthouses was a topic that fascinated us both. But it was something really going in and researching it, because while we had investigated a lot of the places in the book, there were some that we hadn't. And what you would find is, going into these locations that have such a long history, you get all these great stories, but when you start digging in and finding the root of the story, you sadly have to say, well, wait a minute. There's no real evidence of this. So what exactly is going on here? And, sometimes the history lines up. Sometimes you'll have, a lighthouse where a strange disappearance or a murder occurred or something like that. But then you get other stories, other locations that have great stories, but there's really nothing historically to back that up. And that's what we look for. Now we present the information. And we put it out there for people. But, to clarify what I'm talking about, a great example of that is the Queen Mary. Right. The Queen Mary is known as one of the most haunted. A lot of people tout it as one of the most haunted locations in the country and so forth. And, it's a haunted ship. And yes, it is haunted. I have no doubts about that. I've investigated the Queen Mary a number of times. However, when you really start looking at some of the stories, they are lacking in historical connections. And for me, a ghost story can be pretty fascinating without the history, but when you find documentation that supports the purported haunting, that takes it to another level for me. So with the Queen Mary, one of the most famous stories is about the little girl who purportedly drowned in the pool. But, there's no evidence for that. There's no historical documentation. There's no ship's documentation. There's nothing in the news. There's really nothing to prove, yes, this did indeed happen. So, sometimes what I find happens in some of these locations, you get a great story, and the source of it ends up being, well, a psychic came and told us this. And I do not for a moment discount psychic ability. However, sometimes if you get a singular person who comes in and spins a great story, where's the support for that as a valid documented sighting of a ghost or an experience? And those are just some of the things that, we get to explore doing this haunted series.
Well, I'm a lot like you. I want to find out the history behind a phenomena if I can. I can go into a location, get a sense of something going on, get a strong sense of something going on. But I want to look back and be able to find the history of it,
Oh, sure.
like a
Yeah.
verification of some type. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's.
But people get mad too, Lon.
Oh yeah.
I mean, some people, and I'll tell you, I'll give you another example of that. I don't know if we've ever talked much about tulpas on the show, and I know I've been on with you a bunch of times, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
And we're going off on a different track here, but this is something that really fascinates me. And I'll give you another example of this whole quote fabrication. So the Myrtles Plantation, again, another location that's touted as one of the most haunted places in the country. It is indeed extremely haunted. It's kind of like Octagon. I've been there a lot of times, and you can sit outside at the Myrtles and get EVPs out on the patio, and it's that kind of a place. However, the Myrtles' most famous ghost story, one of its most famous ghost stories, is about Chloe. And as the tale goes, there was this was during the slavery period, there was a female slave named Chloe who was the mistress of the plantation owner. And the first thing that happened was Chloe was caught eavesdropping, and as a result, one of her ears was cut off. So from that time on, she wore a turban. Now, after that, Chloe got worried because she was getting older and thought she was going to be put out to work in the fields again. So she contrived a plan to poison the children that were in the home and only give them a mild poison and then nurse them back to health so that she would be, sort of seen as a hero figure, you save the kids. And she made a mistake and used too much oleander, as the story goes. It's a very detailed story. And the children died. As a result, the other slaves were very angered and afraid that they were going to be punished. So they chased Chloe down and caught her and put her to death. Now, this is an incredible tale that does not bear up to historical examination. And I'll tell you, a few years ago, I was touring, doing a lecture tour, and I was speaking on tulpas, the topic of tulpas, and we'll get to that in a second. And I really aggravated some people when I started talking about and basically blew this whole myth away about Chloe, because the thing is, when you poke in the historical records, you'll find that those kids did die, yes, but they died from yellow fever.
Right.
Because there was an epidemic in the region around that time. Furthermore, it's proven that the plantation owner at the time was well known in the region for being incredibly devoted to his wife and had no reputation at all of having relationships with any of the slaves or anything like that. So, while we don't always have records of the slaves who were forced to work on these plantations, here's a case where we do have some records of the family that supports this whole tale not being true. Now, a twist comes along in this because there is a photograph that, to my knowledge, has never been debunked. It's an incredibly intriguing photograph. It's pre-digital. And it is of the Myrtles plantation that appears to show the ghostly form that matches the description of Chloe,
right,
standing outside of the building. So this is pretty incredible, and of course this begs another question: how exactly is a spirit manifesting if it was never there to begin with? Well, my belief for that is that we go into the realm of the tulpa, and that is a entity that is manifested from pure thought. Now, this sounds a bit out there to some people, initially, but there's a rich history of this concept. And if we step back for a second and we think about, okay, at this point, every year, thousands of people go to visit the Myrtles plantation, and a good portion of them are there to try to catch a glimpse of Chloe.
right.
So, what does what does that energy of all those people create? What does it contribute to the location and to whatever is there? So, we can really go down the rabbit hole with this and think about, all right, well, we've either got an entity that is being co-created by the collective consciousness, or, we could simplify and say, all right, well, there's a spirit there that is just choosing to manifest in the form of Chloe because that's what everyone is expecting. And, these things to me are even more fascinating than just a cool ghost story in some ways, because now we're getting into the human interaction, the human energy field, the collective consciousness, and a whole lot more things that really could start taking us in a direction of understanding more about ghostly manifestations in general.
Well, the tulpa and thought form theory has been something I've been looking into, or an aspect I've been looking into for quite a while now. It's you're right. I believe a lot of what people see that manifest are either the thought forms or tulpa or whatever you want to call it. But just like poltergeist activity, it's a thought form for the most part. I mean, there may be something there that may help it to manifest. There may be an energy there that may increase it, but for the most part, it's a living person that's actually creating the manifestation. And this was something that we were contemplating while we were investigating the Chicagoan humanoid phenomena. Were these becoming thought forms? Were these manifestations that people were actually looking for this thing and thought they actually saw it, but they may have actually created it, and we weren't sure. I didn't. It was tough to really find out or know how many people knew of what was going on, but it was just one of the many theories that we had bouncing around. But yeah, you're right. You talk about a location like the Myrtles Plantation where you've got a lot of people that go there and are expecting something to happen, or expecting to see something, and their collective consciousness manifests something. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. And, I think, first of all, it is a theory that's been around for a long time. Of course, Alexander David Niel in the early 1900s brought the concept of tulpas back from Tibet, brought it to the West. And, of course, classical Western magical traditions talk about thought forms. And really the two, they don't quite correlate exactly, but they're very similar. The concepts are very similar. Mm-hmm. But, this idea of tulpas within the realm of paranormal or supernatural studies, it's something that comes around. It cycles constantly. And you see, John Keel wrote about tulpas and looked at the concept for a while. Even Lauren Coleman did for a while. Mm-hmm. So a lot of writers in the modern era have looked at this concept. Now, my theory on this is that we've really moved into a new era, if you will, or a new level of the possibility of these things manifesting. And what I mean by that is that we now more than ever have a way for the collective consciousness of humanity to connect at the speed of light, because now we have the internet.
Absolutely.
And, an idea or a concept can go around the world in no time now, whereas, in the old days, of course, it had to go, it's gradually gotten faster, obviously, as we progress. Now mm-hmm. You can post something on a, social media, and a few moments later, someone on the other side of the world is probably reading it. So we have to start questioning, all right, what is that link going to in turn create? Mm-hmm. I don't know if we've talked about this topic or not, but, Slender Man, that was one of the things that I talked about a lot a few years ago when I was doing the lecture on tulpas. And, Slender Man is a weird phenomena, if you will. And I know some people get aggravated that, it gets linked in with paranormal stuff. But here's the reality. It was created. It was completely fabricated on the internet. Has a part of a contest. And for listeners who don't know the whole history of Slender Man, there was a forum called Something Awful. these guys decided to have a contest and come up with a paranormal themed something that they could make go viral on the internet. That was the actual intent of the initial part of the contest. And of course, people were doing all these Photoshop aliens and cryptids and all kinds of things. And along comes this guy, a user named Victor Surge, who created a very subtle image of this creepy figure lurking in the background of a playground.
Mm-hmm.
And he started developing this story, and he brought us a modern boogeyman. Essentially, is what he did. He brought us the Slender Man, which initially didn't even have a name. Was at one point called the Operator, and then was called the Slender Man, 2 words, and it all kind of morphed into Slender Man. And Slender Man took over that thread completely. All these other people started contributing. They created a modern mythos around this character. They created, wood blocks that showed him in the 15th century, and it was crazy. And there was a video series created about this character. Now, what became disturbing about this is that, yeah, their concept did go viral, but what happened was people independently who had not seen this on the internet started reporting encounters with a figure that matched the description of the Slender Man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you tell me what the heck is going on with that? That to me, I think that is the collective consciousness co-creating something into existence. Because sadly, humans a lot of times default to fear. The negative emotions get a real spike in energy and a real reaction from people. And when you throw these things out there, it causes a chain reaction. And I think that's what the case is with the Slender Man, these manifestations. And I was telling people, it was really bizarre because the last lecture I gave on that tour, the Tulpa tour, was, I was warning people. I said, we haven't seen the last of this Slender Man mythos, and it has the potential for becoming something very disturbing. You need to be aware of it. And just a couple of months later, there was a case in Wisconsin where these 2 girls tried to kill their classmate because of this whole Slender Man. They bought into this mythos of this Slender Man and thought they were going to go live in his house in the forest or something.
Mm-hmm.
So these are very disturbing, powerful energies that we're sort of tinkering around with.
And as investigators and researchers, I think that's something that we're going to need to be aware of in the future. Just putting wild speculation out there without much proof can, you can see right there with that phenomena what can happen. And you're right. I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about for quite a while. When you hear of something, when you hear of somebody seeing, we'll just say, for instance, a humanoid of some type or an unknown creature, and one of the first things you got to think about it. Well, is this real, or is this something that's manifested? By a living or by a human being. I mean, I think some of the modern phenomena can be attributed to that as well.
Oh, sure, yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, you bring back the Myrtle Plantation sightings, and you start thinking about some of the other haunted areas where people, and that being photographed as well. It's just mind blowing. It really is. I agree with you. This is something we're all going to need to be aware of. Tim Renner, who I think you had done a show with him and talked about tulpas with him as well. This is something him and I have talked about. In particular, we live in the same part of the state, Pennsylvania, and some of the stuff that just pops up it's like, well, you can't believe what you're seeing. Where did that come from? Is this something I saw? Was it something I manifested? it gets to the point where, are these things manifesting and actually staying around, are part of our reality? Who knows?
Yeah, that's certainly potential. I mean, and then, part of what is both frustrating for some people and fascinating for others in this field is that when you really start to question some of these things and seriously question the potential for the origin point or the the explanation for some of these things, it really throws you down the rabbit hole, because you have to consider these different concepts, this just being one of them. I mean, really, we could go a whole different direction and say, okay, well, what about all of these things? Why are so many weird sightings and just strange encounters, one-off encounters? What's going on here? And, how does this play in with a lot of tribal and native beliefs that we've moved into a time where a lot of these portals and gateways to other dimensions are starting to open up? And that's another fascinating topic. I mean, even quantum science is now looking at that and saying, oh, yeah, there's other dimensions of existence. So, just acknowledging that and thinking about that and saying, whoa, okay. I had a tribal elder tell me many, many years ago, well before all the quantum science stuff, he was telling me a story about this other race that used to live here and how they left. And he said, well, they departed through, it translated as a shimmering doorway. And, of course, my question was, can they, where is that doorway? And of course, it's in an area that's taboo to Native Americans now. And, you start looking at these questions and you think, okay, well, just because we can't get to these other dimensions doesn't mean that they can't still get here.
Absolutely.
So does this explain, some of what people are seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Because, the reports, I don't know about you. I know you get a lot of reports and everything. I've had people ask me in the past year, people are always asking me on shows and interviews and stuff, well, do you think activity is on a downturn? And I just kind of chuckle. No, not at all.
It's far from it.
It's on an upswing, and really, I mean, I see it tracking the last several years. It just increases more and more each year as far as I'm concerned. Now, the waves are more defined, which is interesting because, you'll get a whole flap of UFO sightings, and then that'll go quiet for a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then over here, you'll see a whole, here we've got 6 months of intense Sasquatch encounters. Mm-hmm. So it's really strange how you have to look at it holistically, I think. If you were looking at only one phenomena, you might say, well, okay, we've got kind of a low cycle right now. But overall, in terms of strange phenomena, I think we're on an incredible upswing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, of course, we had the flap in Chicago, and that lasted for about 7 or 8 months. We've had a few sightings here and there. Well, I read one at the beginning of the show. And we've had sightings in other parts of the country as well. In particular down in Florida, where we had a group of sightings down there, and we've had several sightings up in Ontario. So, you're right, and this just keeps happening. Just like the upright canine sightings in Pennsylvania, something that has, we had a flap for about a year, then it waned up, but we're still getting sightings. But you're right. It has increased. People, I don't know why people are under the impression it hasn't increased. I don't know if it's because, maybe we're getting more bizarre sightings. And why is that going on? Is that an interdimensional phenomena? Or, like you said before, is it a tulpa or is it something like that? But it is very strange.
Yeah, and you bring up something interesting is this whole, another crazy topic is Dogman.
Right.
Because really, if you look at Dogman sightings overall, there's some pretty big gaps of time, where there's really nothing reported and there doesn't seem much of anything's going on. Now, we've got classic werewolf stories out of Europe. And, of course, something I've looked at quite a bit is early colonial times in America. there's quite a few sightings of werewolves.
Mm-hmm.
And they're crazy accounts. I mean, there's in fact your territory, Pennsylvania. There was one I wrote about. I found this account that loggers were having trouble because these werewolves were harassing the logging carts that were coming down. They were attacking the horses. So they painted hex symbols on the wheels of the wagons in an effort to ward off these werewolves. Now, obviously, these are European settlers. They're coming over, and that's what they're identifying it as.
Right.
Really, we can equate the two. Okay, werewolf, dogman, yeah, pretty much the same thing when you look at the descriptions. If you leave out the whole movie folklore of being bitten and transformed and all that, the fanciful story aspects. So, we've got that period, and then we have a few sporadic things like the Defiance werewolf and things like that. But then we've got this whole modern wave of dogman sightings, and I find it pretty fascinating. Now, initially, I saw a lot of them and thought, well, this is weird. You take out the Bray Road stuff is sort of isolated, and of course, our friend Linda Godfrey has done incredible work on that. But you go outside of that, you only get a few isolated incidents here and there until recently, and now these things are popping up everywhere. And, my first inclination when they started showing up frequently was, I wonder if people are seeing, Sasquatch-like creatures that are just, for some reason they're equating it to, a werewolf or a dogman type of thing, but they've just become too defined at this point. And there's some of these encounters that, the people are describing seeing these things very, very clearly. And it's obviously they're describing something that's an upright canid as opposed to, a typical Sasquatch description. So it's just an intriguing phenomenon.
Yeah, Butch Wachowski and I have been looking into this now for almost, I guess, about 4 years. But when we started getting reports out of Pennsylvania, that's one of the things we started thinking, well, are people actually seeing Bigfoot and are just missing, identification, or are their minds kind of, making them think it's something other than a Sasquatch or whatever. But no, you're right. They're very defined. They're very defined descriptions. They're not embellishing on this stuff. These upright canines are huge. I mean, for the most part, they're taller than any Bigfoot sighting in that particular area. We've had them up to 9 to 10 foot. And the descriptions they're coming up with, and this is, we started calling them lichens because they, if you're familiar with the Underworld series, I mean, the descriptions are very similar to what people see in those movies. So,
right.
I mean, are they associating that with the movies? I don't know. It's hard to tell if that's actually what's going on. But you're right. It does pop up in waves. And in fact, down in Maryland back in the 1960s and 70s in Frederick County, Maryland, there were like 7 reports at that time of this upright canine. And they were very specific reports as well. And in fact, I talked to one of the witnesses who had an encounter with one of these things back in 1964. And when he was a boy, and he saw something. I don't know what exactly it was, but it was something. And his description and the way he talked about it was very disturbing.
Yeah, but again, some of those, there's sets of these isolated cases, like Bray Road and the Maryland sightings and things like that in the past. But for some reason in recent times, I mean, we've just got this massive wave of these things.
Yeah.
They're cropping up everywhere, and there are regional explanations for some of it. I think the Bray Road stuff is something very unique. Now, maybe those things spread out from there. I don't know. Of course, in my territory, the Southwest, we've got accounts of skinwalkers that go way back to, early early European expansion days. So, those have always been there. But, whatever's going on now with all these dogman sightings is just kind of crazy.
Well, while we're on together, I want to mention that you and I both had a mutual friend who passed this past year, J.C. Johnson. I know you and J.C. were involved with some investigations in the past. When you talk about weird phenomena, canids, Bigfoot, a lot of other strange things, I mean, J.C. always comes to mind. And I'm telling you, I mean, some of the investigations that he was involved in on the reservation were quite intriguing. He gave me a lot to write about for a good amount of time.
Yeah, I'm still feeling that loss, man. I tell you, because JC was a good friend and a good investigator, and it was. Yeah, I'm thankful that that he was my friend and I got to spend time in the field with him and everything. And he's a good example of one of the things I believe about investigating in this field is that there's always the human component in terms of who you choose to spend a lot of time in the field with and who you investigate with.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's a haunted location or whatnot, you can have people who participate who are just not by their own fault, but who are just energy killers. They just alter the interaction, the experience, whatever it is.
Right.
And I've seen these people that you can take them into the most haunted location on the planet and nothing will happen that night.
Right.
It's going like, well, this place doesn't live up to its hype. And they automatically assume that something's wrong with the location. And I always say, well, wait a minute, let's back up. And, let's think about the people you were there with, a combination of people. And sometimes it's not always a person. Sometimes it's the combination of people. And, I try very hard to primarily investigate with people that, I have a good connection with, and I know, things I will experience things with. And I tell you, man, JC and I, whenever we went out, things just went nuts. It was really, you just never knew what to expect. And,
yeah, I know.
He was one of a kind.
I have seen some of the films and such, and I've heard the stories, and you've told me before. It just seems like these things were drawn to JC for some reason. I remember you had all been at a campsite together, and things started getting thrown into the campsite, and all kinds of crazy stuff was going on.
Oh yeah. Well, we had, and there was another night. Now we were on reservation territory, and up in the Four Corners region, and we were pretty high elevation. It was, of course, it's supposed to be clear, but you know how that works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we got this rain that came in that night, and I had grabbed the wrong tent when I left that weekend. And this tent I was in started leaking like a sieve, and middle of the night. And I said, damn, yeah. So I got up and I was like, well, screw this. I'll just go sleep in the Jeep. So I got in my Jeep, put the seat all the way back, and went back to sleep to the sound of this pouring rain. Had a soft top Jeep, sailcloth top on it at the time. And it was the weirdest thing because, I'm laying there asleep, and then, that feeling like when you're, when you're on a boat or something, that gentle rocking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of half asleep, half awake, and I'm feeling like I'm rocking. And, I kind of bring myself back to consciousness on this, thinking, wait a minute. And, as I'm waking up, I realize that the whole Jeep is rocking.
Mm.
And something was on the back corner of that Jeep, just pushing it down, up and down, just like making it, making the Jeep rock. And of course, I jumped up and I, grabbed my sidearm, because who knows what was going to be out there, and pitch black. And of course, as soon as I bolted upright, it stopped, and whatever it was, took off, and couldn't even really hear it over the rain, but just a brief glimpse of something kind of running away. I knew it wasn't one of the guys because it was pouring rain out there. So it's just one of the many things. I mean, there was always something like that, and fortunately, I've had a lot of those. I guess you could say, fortunately, I've had a lot of those types of experiences, and I strive to work with people that the energy just kind of jives right with.
Yeah, one of the stories that I never really kind of figured out with JC was when he was describing this winged Bigfoot. Now, I don't know if he ever talked to you about that, but this
Yeah.
on the mesa, the Bigfoot up on the mesa that was had the wings on him, and he swore up and down he saw this thing, and I don't know what he saw. I mean, but when JC talked about things, it sounded pretty convincing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that story, and it was kind of, it was like the whole bat squatch thing that happened up in the Northwest, and it did just kind of leave you shaking your head. I'll say this, I've investigated all over the world, and the Navajo Reservation is one of the strangest places on this planet, hands down.
I'll agree with
that. It really is a different world in more ways than one, and it's hard for people to conceive of that unless they've experienced it. I tell you, it's a spooky experience driving across that reservation in the middle of the night. There's no, unless you're near a city, there's no light pollution. There's, the landscape is almost alien, and it's beautiful, but it also has a different quality, a different strangeness about it that you just can't fully describe unless you experience it yourself. And the weird thing is that I'll tell you, some of the stories, even to this day, that I still get from that region, if they weren't being told to me by the people that they are, I would say, get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, these are people, I hear these accounts from people who have no reason to fabricate, no reason to, no benefit to them making up these stories or anything else. And I tell you, weird things, man. I had someone show me these tracks. A lot of these things were like 22 inches long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just trying to wrap your head around it. I mean, we find Sasquatch tracks are found all over the planet almost, and you hear a wide range of sizes, and you get into these ranges that are 15, 16, 18 inches, 22 inches. I mean, this is then you stop and think, okay, how tall is this thing? And you go back to and you hear these stories from people on the reservation that report seeing these creatures that are 10 feet tall or more.
Oh, yeah.
And you think, oh my gosh, what is going on? And that sounds absurd to people who don't understand that there's a lot of territory on that reservation and not many people.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, that's the one thing I really cherished with JC was he went out with the camera and he was interviewing people and it was letting them tell what occurred.
Yeah.
Especially with the furry one encounters. I mean,
Yep.
if JC would come on and tell you about that, you would think, well, this guy's seeing stuff. But when you had the native people coming on there who actually had the encounter, and he'd go to each family member, and they'd tell you exactly what was going on. It's like, my God, I believe these people. something
Yeah.
is going on out there.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you know, like you said, you hear him first, you know, out of context, and you think, okay, you know what, what's this guy hitting, you know, that's leading him to come up with these stories. But no, it's no, not at all, man. I mean, we're talking, and you know, to put it in context for people, I always like to point this out. The Navajo Nation, it's oh, now I can't remember the figure. It's around 27,000, just over 27,000 square miles. Now, within that, there's only about 300,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
you know, you stop and think about those figures, and, you know, bear in mind, like anywhere else, the people are concentrated around the cities, you know. So you have a few big cities on the res, and that's where most people live. You know, you got a few people out in the territories, but there's large portions of that reservation that you can wander across all day and not see anybody.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
You know, this is one of the reasons that I think that some of these things are in existence on that reservation. It's one of the many reasons, but you know, there's plenty of territory for them to be there and, you know, just not be encountered by humans a large portion of the time.
Well, I got to give you one thing. JC opened my eyes to a lot of different things, a lot of things I never even thought existed. But being associated with him for the number of years I was able to get the information from him, I had to take everything in consideration now because, you know, the witness reports and then him going firsthand and talking to people, you know, it really brought it to, you know, it really brought it out there. And
Sure.
you're right. It is a strange area. It's a magical area. It really is.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, JC, you know, there's different kinds of investigators, and JC was one of those guys who, you know, his approach was to gather the stories. That's, you know, in the old days, he would have been, you know, a wisdom keeper, a storyteller, you know, who just gathered the accounts. And, you know, I think that's how, I can't speak for him, but from my perspective, I think that was the role he was fulfilling. You know, he was, he put himself out there, and he didn't judge people. He wasn't critical, you know, or you know, he didn't bash people with his with a skeptical attitude or anything like that. He took people at face value, and he said, you know, he would say, tell me what you experienced, you know, tell me what happened. And just because he did that, I think he brought comfort to a lot of people, because,
Oh, he did.
you know, some of these things that, you know, people are experiencing, they just need, and I experienced that myself. You know, a lot of people come to me, they just want to tell their story. They want somebody to listen to them that they know is not going to say you're nuts, you need medication, you know, or anything like that. They just want to say, this is what happened to me. You know, I just want to tell somebody, you know, somebody who doesn't think I'm crazy or anything else. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're all going to miss him. There's no doubt. You know, we're going to miss him for a long time, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
So, you had begun a project, the Wood Knox Project, for Bigfoot research. You've had 3 books come out. You going to continue with that?
I think so. You know, the Wood Knox series is the subtitles of Journal of Sasquatch Research, and my concept for that from the beginning was to get out pieces from other people, other researchers in the cryptozoology field who, you know, had something to share that maybe wasn't big enough for a full book, you know, if they wanted to explore just one particular topic or something like that, or a series of accounts. And I'm really happy with the ones that have come out so far. It's, you know, just had an incredible list of my friends and colleagues from the field that have contributed so far. Lyle Blackburn, Ken Gerhard, you know, Lauren Coleman, you know, just a whole litany of people from the field. And provided, you know, people are still interested in reading it, which I think they are, because number 3 has done very well, and I've gotten a lot of responses on it. And provided people still want to, contribute, yeah, we'll keep going with it.
Excellent. You've got a book coming out soon on a state that you don't usually associate with cryptid activity, Nevada.
Yeah. Well, living in the desert so long, I've really explored the whole region. And when I started digging into stuff in Nevada, it was pretty fascinating because like you said, the state you rarely hear anything, but man, there are reports. Now, I wrote a piece for one of the Woodknots on Bigfoot sightings in Nevada. And, just kind of following the trail, and of course, going back to some of the native connections and associations with encounters in Nevada, that was pretty revealing in and of itself. Of course, we have Lovelock Cave is in Nevada, which is a really famous location associated with a Sasquatch type creature. And there's a lot more. Digging in, it was pretty surprising. I'll tell you what probably surprised me the most. There are a whole number of water monsters in Nevada. Now, that's bizarre because Nevada is the driest state in the U.S.
Absolutely.
So you would not expect this for a moment. But, man, there's a bunch of them. So you've got Tahoe Tessie, which, of course, Lake Tahoe now borders the Nevada. It straddles the border of Nevada and California. But there's a lot of sightings, a long history of sightings of something in that lake. But then you go down a little bit, you've got Walker Lake, which purportedly has a serpent. And then one of my favorites, these stories of water babies up in Pyramid Lake. And that's just a bizarre set of tales. And kind of puzzling, too, because Pyramid Lake, it's very picturesque. It's been used in a lot of movies. It's fairly famous. The image is famous. But a lot of strange deaths in that lake. And a lot of tales that go all the way back to Native American times of some kind of bizarre creatures dwelling in that lake.
Well, I definitely look forward to reading that.
Should be out probably.
I'll be honest with you, other than UFO. What's that?
It should be out probably within a few weeks to a month.
Oh, great. Yeah, you think of Nevada, you think of UFOs, but you don't think a whole lot else.
Right.
But, yeah, I look forward to that. So, David, how can people get in contact with you? And do you have any other things going on to where you're going to be appearing?
Oh man, I've got a whole list of stuff. So you can find the books at Amazon.com, and I have an author page on there. If you just search my name or search one of the books and go to the author page, you'll be able to keep up with releases as they come out. There's a blog. Just search my name on Google, David Weatherly Paranormal or whatever, and you'll find it. It'll also come up under twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. It hasn't been real active recently just because I've been so daggone busy this year.
Oh yeah, well I'll attest to that. You've been busy.
But I do try to post things on there. There is a video project, a couple of them coming out after the first of the year, and I'll be releasing more information about that on social media. Of course, I'm on Facebook. You can check out Society of the Supernatural on Facebook. A lot of what I do is posted there, as well as other members of the organization. You and I will both be at the Bigfoot Camping Adventure.
Yes, sir.
In May of next year.
All right.
And that, I think, is filling up pretty quick, and that's a stellar lineup of people. So
that is going to be a fantastic.
It's going to be a great event.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an amazing event. And oh gosh, I'm at a conference in Texas in March. That's a Bigfoot conference in Houston. I'm at a ghost conference in March. I'm doing a cruise next year. Oh man, you put me on the spot. I can't even remember them all. I'll be speaking in British Columbia again next year.
Oh,
So yeah, I'm all over the place, and yeah, people are free to contact me. If you go to the blog, there's a link on there for email. If you have an account to share or anything else, you can email me directly. And I do try to get back to people. As we've stated tonight, I stay on the move a lot and on the road a lot, but I do try to get back to people at least. And I'm always interested in hearing accounts. We've got Silver State Monsters is the Nevada book that's coming out within the next couple of weeks. I also have a book in the pipeline that should be out fairly soon called Creepy Companions. And it is a history of haunted dolls. This is a full in-depth history that examines haunted dolls and the magical use of dolls, magical and ritual use of dolls, as well as contemporary haunted dolls, and just kind of runs the whole gamut. I'm real happy with how this one came out.
excellent.
Ross and I will have another book in our haunted series out after the first of the year. Man, I told you I got tons of stuff going on. So that's just the first few things off the top of my head.
Well, I'll have to try to get your schedule on here. Within reason, so we can start talking about some of this other stuff you got coming out.
Yeah, definitely, man. Sounds good.
So, David, thanks again for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and let's keep in contact.
Yeah, always good, Lon.
Take care now.
Thanks, man.
Listeners can show their support for Arcane Radio by becoming a patron. Simply go to phantomsandmonsters.com and click the Podbean patron banner. Arcane Radio also accepts direct donations. Before I go, let me leave you with this. American science writer and historian of science, Michael Shermer, once stated, "The fate of the paranormal is to become the normal as our horizons of understanding expand." I thank everyone for listening to the show. Good night, and have a great weekend.